That was kind of one of the magics about the Ethereum ecosystem and kind of those early heydays of the bull was that always some asset class was winning. Either there was wins on new mints, there was wins on shit coins, there was new wins on new protocols. There was always something that we were rotating into, especially if you remember DeFi protocols. It was pretty crazy in the early days. And this is kind of the problem Bitcoin's running into is that there really isn't an asset class that is pushing forward. There isn't an asset class that really is getting the Bitcoin user ecosystem incredibly excited. We've lost kind of the rallying point post runes with everything kind of collapsing. And this is important to understand because what this is going to essentially start springing up is kind of a new threshold and requirements of innovation to bring that excitement back. That could happen with a standalone ordinal project. Maybe that could happen with a standalone rune project. But what we've recognized is that their technology is too simplistic to really see anything massively come out of nowhere, right? Like the expected growth of a rune isn't going to be really based off technical merit. Runes are only capable of doing, the five, six, seven things out there in the marketplace, right? Everything else, right, is pretty limited. And same thing when we look at ordinals, we're not even at the level of doing staking with assets, right? We're still at off-chain snapshots, right? Sorry, I mean on-chain snapshots, where that's really the only ability for us to kind of value these holders. Of course, we can do some other off-chain computations where length of holding can increase the airdrop that you may be getting for holding a specific asset. And you kind of see these types of multipliers. I think RuneCoin probably did the best at this, right, with R6 specifically, right? In terms of making really interesting distribution, Prometheans and Decentralized Token kind of created their own weighting methodology on their algorithm for their airdrops as well. But that's pretty much kind of the entire scope of what's possible on Bitcoin. And that's kind of the important thing to understand here as we talk about this session on New Tech Tuesdays. It's really understanding the technical conversation that is Bitcoin because it's quite different than Ethereum. Ethereum was designed in a post Bitcoin world and as a response to some of the limitations that we saw with Bitcoin already, right? While Bitcoin was created literally as the starting point idea, it was more focused, especially on financial disruption. And because of that, it's led to very different suites of features being created for each of these token based ecosystems. So on Ethereum, we've already graduated because we to L2s because smart contracts were designed from day one, right? This is not the case for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's use cases around smart contracts is no. There is no smart contracts on Bitcoin. What we currently have are workarounds to kind of represent trusted or hopefully trustless states, but there's usually some limitations of centralization and values or requirements because there's no self-defined smart contracts in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And this means that the future that we saw on Ethereum is going to be very different than the future that we should experience now here on Bitcoin. We do not have a copy paste model to move to smart contracts over time. And this is probably the most important thing for you guys to understand if you believe in the future of Bitcoin. It's recognizing that we still have real hurdles ahead. Bitcoin is not ready to race. And what we really want to understand here at the moment right now is twofold things, right? We want to understand that first, the Bitcoin technology requires a meaningful breakthrough for L2s to exist. And none of these breakthroughs have been realized yet, right? None of these technology breakthroughs have been realized yet. The argument that we're going to start here is that realistically, no layer twos exist currently on Bitcoin. And to be very honest, no layer two really has a path that is strong and confident to clear all of the major hurdles at the moment right now. And that's a very important thing to state because this is never an assumption we've ever held on the Ethereum world, right? And then the second assumption you want to also understand is that this is a very diverse and fractured community where some view, runes and ordinals and L2s as negative additions to the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? They believe that it's almost spam, right? You'll see a lot of BTC, laser-eyed maxis who will tell you that ordinals and runes are spam on this network. That you creating these higher fees for whatever spam actions and stuff you want to do to trade your photos is actually hurting the value of the network, right? And that's actually, and does have major impacts as fees go up, because it also makes huge challenges to existing Bitcoin tech that was assuming potentially lower fees than expected. So when you realize those two variables, right, that like the tech was never really built for this and there's real limitations and no one has a solution yet that has been confirmed and aligned for a real L2 to exist, and then pairing that with the very simple understanding that this community isn't fully aligned on what L2 should look like or whether or not L2 should even exist, it creates a very different culture, right? It creates a very different future, right? While Ethereum, on the other hand, right, it was always going to be about smart contracts. It was always about to be expansion. We want L2s, we want L3s, right? Over time, they will come, right? But to be very transparent, we get none of that, right? A lot of us are cheering on L2s, although right now mainnet ETH is as cheap as it could possibly get. But, before in the past, when we've seen this, we would love for trading to move to L2s or cheaper solutions. And we've seen this already with one asset class in the form of shitcoins, right? Ethereum was the dominant maker when it came to all of this stuff for volume. But then when people realize they can play almost the exact same game and that they could get majority of that liquidity over, they can play it even better on other chains, right? Like Solana or Base, right? Side chains or L2s that are allowed to be built off of the Ethereum virtual machine, right? EVM, right? Which we don't have a virtual machine or VM available on Bitcoin. It changes a lot of this narrative. So, as bullish as I am on the future of Bitcoin, this is one of the most important things I want us to all recognize here today. We are in a current state of unknowns. We do not know when L2s will truly come to Bitcoin. We do not know what is the actual primary technology breakthrough that will allow for it, right? We don't know if this is going to be through a roll up. We don't know if this is going to be through a soft fork, and we'll talk about what that means. We don't know if this is going to come through some other new contract structure. You're going to hear new phrases quite a bit over the next few months as people almost make their own, ontology of terms for their bridge, right? You'll hear entangled bridges, you'll hear quantum bridges, you'll hear all this kind of other stuff. And what this means is that we're kind of moving into an era of both real tech and pseudo tech. And the reason why we need to understand this is that pseudo tech, unfortunately, has plagued crypto for quite a long time. And when we're in this state of pseudo tech, what it also means then, and this is the other real important challenge, is that you're going to see a lot of people present their vision of what an L2 should be on Bitcoin, but many of them will be false promises, and more importantly, are missing fundamental technical understandings of how they will achieve them. So, for example, we shared a video. If you haven't, definitely worth watching here on Bitcoin tech limitations. I'll copy the thread and post it here in the chat for you guys. If you go to the top of this, there's a great video of a conversation between Eric Wall, who's a really solid technical expert. And what's great about him is that he's worked on both Bitcoin and Ethereum. He's a co-founder of Taproot Wizards, and he's also a board member of Starknet, right? He's contributed to lots of code contributions here, very thoughtful person. And in this conversation that he has with the Bankless team, he really does a great job of highlighting this. I think it is single-handedly the most powerful thing to understand is that, when you think about it, there's really no Bitcoin L2. Probably the only conversation you could maybe make a pitch for is the Lightning Network utilizing state channels, but it has massive limitations on that, right? Everything else is potentially a farce or is pseudoscience. And Eric gets actually really interestingly, he starts calling these out at the end, which is interesting, right? He talks about something called, Satoshi VM. He talks about Merlin chain, and he shows and tears that all of these are actually technically vaporware. They have zero understanding or ability to actually build what they're saying, right? They do not highlight anything in their technical white papers that showcase that they have found a breakthrough. Rather, what they're utilizing and taking advantage of, which is unfortunately one of the other problems that plagues crypto, is that they know most people won't read the white paper. They're just looking for secondary signals and this kind of race to win this open real estate. And this is kind of the crazy thing, is because there's no definition of layer 2 Bitcoins that is real or tangible or understood. What it means is that everyone can now put their own projection of what that means. And most of us as consumers won't understand it. We won't actually read through white papers. I mean, I'll be very honest. How many of you actually have read the white paper for every project you put capital behind? The honest answer is probably very few of you even read 10% of the white papers. You might open it up, click through 3 pages and believe like, at least there's enough here that this looks real. But the actual ability to qualify the tech is actually going to be a huge, important differentiator if you want to succeed in Bitcoin. This is the realest alpha you can get, is that you want to be as close to the technical breakthroughs as possible. And that means it's following the right leaders, the right framework, the right conviction that you believe in yourself. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to try to be these messiahs, right? That will share with you on what they think a vision of Bitcoin L2s will be. But the truth is that you want to be able to actually have the technical understanding yourself, and that's what these conversations on Tuesday are always going to be. We're going to always introduce you to a technical understanding so that you get somewhat closer to Bitcoin knowledge. And this should help you with both your ordinal, rune, and potential farming opportunities as well. So yeah, let's kind of dive in. So Drow asks, what's a white paper? Well, a white paper or a light paper is usually a set of documentation that is introduced when a new protocol is launching. This was commonly used for ICOs, IDOs, and you'll see, of course, they'll be used for a lot of projects here too. I'm sure a lot of you have seen them. I know you're even joking with the question, but we'll go always down to the basics for everyone here. And what we want to understand is that let's kind of like start our journey into probably one of the strongest technical teams. And this is just my opinion personally. I've been incredibly impressed with the Taproot Wizards team and specifically Eric Wall's communication on technical topics. The reason I like Eric Wall is that he's one of those individuals who has like strong opinions loosely held. That's always been like a really solid way of, I think, growth. And what I mean by that is that he's constantly learning, adapting, and growing, and he's willing to call himself out when he makes mistakes. Because what's interesting is that we're actually going to walk through this, screen share I have right now of Cat VM. This is from the Taproot Wizards team. I'm just going to walk you through the basic language and then build on top of it for each page, because I think this will give you a great fundamental understanding that will put you ahead of 99% of people in Bitcoin right now of understanding layer 2s. But the other reason I like Eric Wall is that he talks about, in this, we'll talk about the Lightning Network, we'll talk about BitVM. And these were both potential breakthroughs that Eric at one point was, right, very bullish on. He was bullish on both of them. And now, if you talk to him today, he's actually bearish on both of them. And he tells you exactly why. And I think that's actually so important, right? When you think about finding a leader like this, he is constantly educating you in his opinion of where the strengths are and weaknesses are and taking in new informations when those break down. That's a really solid sign because I think really when you look at this long term, I think Eric is going to be one of the smartest people because he's seen the spectrum of both Bitcoin and Ethereum as well, which I think is really solid. So what we want to do here is that, I also want to talk to you guys about what Quantum Cats and Taproot Wizards are trying to do, and they have their own massive hurdle. And we'll talk about how they believe the future of L2s are going to happen. And as much as I'm bullish on Eric and their team on how they think and they operate, I am very worried about a very, very large hurdle where they need to make changes to the actual Bitcoin code. And that's what this story talks about, and we'll kind of dive into it here. So, if you have a few minutes, definitely try looking at your screen, but you don't have to. I'll read this story out. This is a kind of a fun white paper on their vision of specifically requesting or their vision of what they think is needed to allow for L2s to exist on Bitcoin. And that's going to be around this idea of a specific command called OP_cat, which is short for concatenate, which is a very specific technical feature to be able to merge two stacks together, which could effectively allow for innovations of L2, specifically around Merkle trees, which are also noted here. We won't get too bogged down on the technical side, but what I want you to understand here is that they're going to be requesting, and this is their challenge of their tech, is they will require effectively a soft fork of Bitcoin to reintroduce new technical code into the main Bitcoin code for this functionality to come back, right? This is actually a deprecated feature that Satoshi once put into his code and language, right? The functionality of OP_cat or concatenate, the ability to concatenate was a function once in Bitcoin code, but it was deprioritized by Satoshi for, I don't know if he had very clear, explicit reasons noted, but many believe due to just security risk and potentially, he had mentioned DDoS attacks. But people now believe there's a way to bring it back without those risks, potentially. And that's what you're going to see with Taproot Wizards. So their hurdle is very simple functionality being added, but it requires a fork, and because it requires a change to Bitcoin code, which is really interesting, the Bitcoin core code. So we'll talk through this, but I think what the team has done here in this CatVM white paper, which is in this kind of fun Dr. Seuss art style, is that they've made it really easy to understand the state of the current L2 technologies here. And I want to walk you through it just because I think they've done a great storytelling. I also think CatVM is one of the smartest things to be farming. It's why we recommended you guys to complete the action last week when they had, or a week ago or a week and a half ago, where they wanted you to do a tweet. This is just an easy bet on a potential L2. And this is kind of where your mindset needs to go if you want to win this next era of Bitcoin. You will need to put bets on actual L2 technology, right? It's not just like, oh, who's going to get the most TVL or what are we going to blast farm? No, it's very different here. You're putting bets on who's going to find a technology breakthrough fastest, right? Is it who's going to find it in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months or 24 months? That is going to have a huge impact on your return, especially being this early into Bitcoin. So let's go into CatVM. I'm going to jump into the screen share here, and I'm just going to read it, right? And I'll read each page, and then I'll give a little bit of more context on top of that. And if you have questions, just feel free to ask, right? This is story time. This is one of the best stories I really sincerely believe you could be listening to right now in the world of Bitcoin, if you believe in Bitcoin's future. So let's come in. So CatVM, there and back again. Abstract. Any attempt to bring off-chain computation to Bitcoin must rely on pre-signed transactions. Pre-signed transactions require either trusted signers or trusted participants and are typically capital inefficient for operators. To break out of this model, Bitcoin consensus rules needs covenants, i.e. the ability to restrict the future flow of coins. The command OP_cat provides covenant functionality and also enables Bitcoin script to simulate finite state machine. CatVM utilizes both of these properties to encumber BTC with arbitrary computation via permissionless optimistic withdrawal path. This is the most technical jargon in this entire doc. I know it starts off pretty large here, but what you want to just understand here is that they're highlighting the current problems of relying on pre-signed transactions, right? It requires you to trust one of these parties, right? When in reality, we would want a trustless environment. And secondly, right, they are capital inefficient for the operators, meaning that it doesn't scale. So what they are then recommending is that they want you to be essentially be able to call this OP underscore cat functionality concatenate, which would then effectively allow them to run covenants, which is a technical feature, which is the ability to restrict the future flow of coins. And this would allow them to simulate finite state machines, which would effectively, from a long story short, allow you to have true trustless logic in the form of true trustless logic to be able to be extended into a layer 2. So it's a lot of words there, but the rest of this gets a little bit more basic here at the moment right now on this front. And what was Crypto asked, like, what is it to stop another team from stealing their bridge solution if it is successful? I don't really think there's going to be anything that could quote unquote prevent it. It's more about who's going to maintain it and update it, right? I mean, that's kind of the other interesting thing about crypto. You could fork everything, right? Like you could fork the shittiest stuff and then just steal it yourself and run it. I mean, to be very honest, if you go look at like a good example of this on Ethereum, right? Tron's a great example. Yeah, that's a great one. Even like right now, if you go look at that campaign that Overworld Exterio ran for their BNB play, they just straight up forked the exact other BNB play right before that, right? And that's kind of what it is that I think you're going to see people who are willing to fork. And to be very honest, I think Taproot Wizards is actually more focused on trying to allow this to be unlocked, right? To be truly unlocked for the ecosystem. But how they will monetize this or capture value is a very interesting question, Wild West Crypto. And that's almost what we need to be asking ourselves with all of these plays, right? The good thing here is that they've already been funded to an extent, right? Via, essentially venture funding at the moment right now. And also they did a very large primary sale, right? With 3,000 cats being sold at roughly, what was this, 5,000? I don't even remember what the price it was, right? $6,000, whatever it may be, $3,500. They raised a nice little one, a nice little piece of capitals that they could execute on, right? So they're sitting on 20-30 million treasury. But yeah, I'm curious to see what their advantage is if they get the breakthrough first. And I think what they're really believing is that if the functionality of OP Cat comes through, that's not actually the proprietary thing. That just unlocks the technical functionality to then hopefully allow other people to build their versions of layer 2 functionality beyond that. And that's really where the hard work comes. Of course, you could always still fork that whatever they deploy, but I think hopefully their advantage is, users, teams, and compounding advantages. But great question overall. So they have this beautiful photo showing the whole world, but let's jump into the next storyline. Our story begins with young Ridgendale awakening in a strange land. Young Ridgendale says, "What? Where am I?" Clouds appears in the skies to form Satoshi, the great spirit of the Isle of Chain. Satoshi says, "It is I who summoned you to the Isle of Chain. Our citizens face a plight. They cannot safely reach the riches of your neighboring isle off-chain. You are a renowned builder in your land. Can you help us bridge our two lands?" Young Ridgendale responds, "This is a strange land indeed, but I will do my best to help your people, Great Spirit." Satoshi then says, "Thank you, young Ridgendale. Explore the Isle of Chain and see where attempts our citizens have made to reach off-chain. Perhaps their attempts will inspire you." As the Great Spirit Satoshi fades away, young Ridgendale begins his exploration of the Isle of Chain. So what is this page really just introducing here? Well, for any chain to truly scale, right, any on-chain protocol to truly scale, they need to leverage off-chain computation. right? Off-chain computation gives advantages for speed, cost, and various other ways to hit scalability. And effectively in this page, right, what we currently have is Bitcoin is purely on chain, right? It is everything is done on chain. That is why everything is then got 10-minute blocks, right? Everything is a lot more expensive, but everything is essentially inscribed forever on chain. But if you had to do that for every sub action and transaction, it would become way too costly to do that on the mainnet, right? It would become incredibly inefficient from a time perspective as well, right? And it also leads to like other large challenges of does the user experience truly improve? So what we're trying to show here in this page, right, is that Bitcoin is in search of a solution potentially. And some would argue externally, and laser-eyed maxis would argue we don't need this solution. But let's live in a world where we do want to believe a solution is needed to bring off-chain value in a trustless, secure, and transparent manner. And if we do that, the benefits there will be potentially meaningful. And that's what this scene is setting up, is that we haven't really got to that point yet for anything right now, but there's been many attempts, and this is what is setting up. So we're going to go look at all the other attempts thus far in the market, or some of the more notable attempts. So young Ridgendale begins his journey in the multi-sig Madland. The region is chaotic and full of adventurers who are attempting to cross the multi-sig bridge. Young Ridgendale says, "Greetings, brave adventurer. This bridge looks like it could break at any moment. What if it collapses and you cannot return home?" The adventurer responds, "That's just the risk we take as adventurers to off-chain. We know the wormhole will appear and collapse the bridge many times a year, and we know hackers lie in wait on the other side. But this is why the multi-sig bridge is only crossed by the bravest and most degenerate adventurers." Young Ridgendale wishes the adventurers luck on his journey across the multi-sig bridge. As young Ridgendale leaves the multi-sig Madlands, he glances back and sees the bridge collapsing. So this was kind of one of the first early attempts on understanding how to get to an L2 world, right? It was requiring trust and essentially a multi-sig wallet, right? You would essentially have this ability to create a multi-sig bridge and bring those funds over. But it was not trustless, and it came with huge problems with the bridge constantly collapsing, and more importantly, not having that trust, right? Not having that trustless design that you would traditionally want with a on-chain crypto layer. So because of this, right, we essentially run into this larger problem, right? Like this runs into the larger problem of, okay, this doesn't even meet the definition of a true layer 2, because our ability to have money in, money out isn't as clear, and there are also numerous functionalities of where this drops. And this was just kind of one of the earlier attempts, but it's kind of showing you in this kind of successive manner as these early attempts kind of keep moving forward. So as we go to the next page, he talks about the next approach here. Young Ridgendale exits the multi-sig Madlands and journeys to the pre-signed peninsula. There, he first encounters the bridge to nowhere that leads to the Lightning Wasteland. A local is strolling by the bridge. Across the bridge, a sparse number of citizens appear to be doing acrobatics. Young Ridgendale says, "Hello, madam. Why is there a bridge to this barren land? And is that an acrobat I see amongst the vast nothingness?" The local responds, "The Lightning Wastelands were once thought to contain the riches of off-chain. A few delusional citizens still believe riches can be unearthed there. They continue their mental gymnastics to this day." Young Ridgendale responds, "The bridge to nowhere does look sturdy. However, it clearly relies on pre-signed transactions and cooperative citizens to support it. Regardless, it doesn't lead anywhere useful. This is clearly not the bridge the great Satoshi wishes to see built." Young Ridgendale thanks the local for the help and continues down the pre-signed peninsula. So this is them in this page calling out the Lightning Network, and they actually put a little bit of another addendum here in the image. I'm going to read that really quickly. Ridgendale's journal. Lightning Network payment channels are established by committing funds to a multi-sig address through an on-chain transaction. Parties update their respective balances through off-chain transactions by collaboratively signing a transaction that settles the final balances and spends the multi-sig funds. The collaborative signing requirement introduces several fundamental limitations. One, the Lightning Network is limited to payments only and does not add functionality in a way that other L2 designs can, right? So it's only payments for the Lightning Network. Two, to receive payments, the recipient must be online and responsive to sign the transaction, making self-custody mobile wallets difficult to build and use. Three, extending payment channels to multiple parties introduces significant complexities and requires additional trust assumption. And four, Lightning channels have a fixed capacity that can only be increased with on-chain transactions. This can lead to liquidity issues in both receiving and routing payments. The truth is that if you've actually ever interacted with the Lightning Network, it's such a bad user experience, right? Like just insanely bad. And what you see here is that you run into these issues. Lightning Network is more like the laser maxi eyed extension of believing what maybe an L2 can look like, right? This might be the only one they might consider, but even that has some, issues. And the reason is that they like it because it's only focusing on payments and finance, right? And this has kind of been like a large play. If you're familiar with Jack Dorsey, who's the co-founder of Twitter, he's been a large proponent. A lot of people believe Lightning Network at one point would counter the value what Stripe Payments as a company has done in the Western market. And if you're familiar, Stripe is literally one of the most insanely valued payment companies in the Web 2 world. And Lightning was trying to go after that to a certain extent. Lightning's run into tons of limitations. And like you said, in order to receive money on a digital network, you have to be online too to receive it. So if someone sends you money on the Lightning Network, you have to accept it as well, right? Which is just leads to these really weird user experience edge cases. And the truth is that this is only utilizing state channels, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. What you're going to recognize here is that the overall problem right now is that you're still seeing this large emphasis of people still pushing Lightning forward. And this is going to be a larger debate you'll see because a lot of Lightning developers, and they're smart people, they were trying with a very direct manner, but a lot of Lightning devs are now starting to throw their hands up and realizing like, shit, this doesn't really work. And this definitely doesn't work in a high fee environment. As soon as fees hit a certain threshold, the Lightning Network becomes very low value, right? Even the multi-sig approach, right, doesn't really exist here. And this is kind of what you want to understand is that, without needing to know too much about the Lightning Network yet, what you just want to realize is like, it's just payments. It's not a real L2. It's not what's going to bring this DeFi functionality forward, at least in the way we want. So Laser Eye and Maxis want Bitcoin to kind of replace existing Web 2, while I think a lot of crypto, futurists would say that they want to do way more on top of that. They want to extend the financial protocols and leverage everything from lending to swap to staking to vesting to whatever it may be to make this a much more richer economic ecosystem, right? So this is also why it's important when you look at this is that, you'll see a lot of people talk about Lightning Network, and it's very polarizing for that reason. And if you even talk to Eric Wall, or you hear Eric Wall in his last talk with Bankless, he tells you he was bullish on Lightning at one point, but he's now very bearish because he's come to realize it. The only people who are left there really believe it have to do these mental gymnastics to make themselves believe this will matter. I think Lightning Network does have value to like corporate structures a lot more than it does for like retail and regular individual consumers. But in general, right, it's not the vision that any of us truly care about because it doesn't unlock a DeFi summer for Bitcoin by any means. So as we continue in this journey, right, we then start talking about L2s, right? And this is then the L2 village. So young Ridgendale continues along the pre-signed peninsula until he encounters the thriving L2 village. The L2 village is flooded with builders and boasts a magical pot of VC gold that never depletes. The builder says, "Sir, I have not seen you around before. Come with me and see the marvel we have achieved." Young Ridgedale, eager to see what these exuberant engineers have achieved, follows quickly behind the builder to the BitVM Bridge construction site. The builder says, "Feast your eyes upon this feat of innovation. We're basically all ready to off-chain." Young Ridgedale is taken aback by the horrendously complicated Rube Goldberg construction that lies half complete in front of him. He inspects it closely. He says, "But builder, isn't this just like the bridge to nowhere, but infinitely more complicated?" The builder glances over at the acrobats in the lightning wasteland and looks offended. He says, No, this is so much better. Our structure combines pre-signed transactions, hash lock commitments, Merkleized ZK-proof traces, and an extensive network of watchtowers watching the bridge to make sure it is safe and supported. As long as we can manage all these pre-signed transactions and the bridge operator can front all withdrawals, it works perfectly. Young Ridgedale takes a final befuddled look at the BitVM bridge and informs the builder he must be on his way. And again, this is their shot at BitVM, which was about 3 months ago was the hottest thing to talk about in Bitcoin tech. But now I think a lot of people are facing the reality of its shortcomings. And again, we have a note in Ridgedale's journal here that we're going to go into specifically about BitVM. And Ridgedale's journal says, due to the lack of expressive covenants in Bitcoin, BitVM has to rely on pre-signed transactions to force funds to go through their optimistic withdrawal path. Because we don't have a way to validate multiple authentication paths in Bitcoin, BitVM and BitVM2 rely on Lamport signatures, bit commitments in its challenge response game. The use of pre-signed transactions and their commit reveal scheme means that only a predetermined prover can withdraw from BitVM. No one other than the prover can exit permissionlessly. The model is dependent on the prover being able to front all withdrawals. So, long story short, what you start recognizing, and again, Eric goes through this in his last podcast too on Bankless, and he shares like BitVM starts off with a very exciting concept. And it's this ability to believe that you can actually do some type of ZK rollups on Bitcoin, right? This was kind of the belief that BitVM started with. And they believe that, okay, if we can actually do that, we can then effectively build to an L2 future. But the problem is that they couldn't do that. And it led to all these insane workarounds where it only works in 1 or 2 edge cases and doesn't really fulfill what a true L2 is. It's going to mimic and look everything like an L2, but effectively is missing some of those fundamentals, right? The idea of a trustless, permissionless access point for everyone who enters and wants to exit on their own terms while being truly reliant and settled on the layer 1 as well. And that's kind of the other important thing to understand is that almost all of the tech that you're going to see with layer 2s are going to look like these crazy Rube Goldberg machines. You're going to see all of these things right here that it's going to be massive impact here, right? And because of that, you want to be able to understand then which protocols, which teams do you want to actually back for their breakthroughs? Because even though this is, again, Taproot Wizards and Quantitaps throwing shade, and I think it's like good shade, don't get me wrong, at these companies, they also have their own challenges too, and we'll talk about that here shortly. But let's kind of keep going through this. We're about halfway here. We're going to got to go through this a little bit faster. After leaving the L2 village, young Ridgedale wanders around the island and contemplates his next steps. He walks by Permissionless Point and makes a mental note that it would be a great place to build a bridge from. Young Ridgedale says, I fear that the citizens of Chain will never safely reach off-chain. The multi-sig Madlands will never be stable, and the pre-signed peninsula is plagued with false promise. I have explored all the bridges in the isle, and none are functional and practical. Surely there must be some construction that can achieve all of this. It just feels like something is missing. Young Ridgedale grows wary from his journey around the Isle of Chain. He spies a Merkle Tree forest and decides to seek shade there. As young Ridgedale walks into the Merkle Tree forest, a shimmering wave emanates from the wood. The Quantum Cat slowly coalesces in the air before him. Young Ridgedale says, Who are you? Quantum Cat, meow. The Quantum Cat, you say, you were around when Satoshi created the Isle of Chain? Meow. And you were banished to this forest many moons ago? Meow. The Quantum Cat begins to float down one of many paths into the Merkle Tree Forest. Young Ridgendale decides to follow. After traversing many branches in the past, the Quantum Cat stops at a collection of massive tree roots. Young Ridgendale, wow, Quantum Cat, you just helped me trace a valid path through the Merkle trees all the way to the roots. You must be a creature of some power. Among the roots, young Ridgendale spies a door inlaid in a tree trunk and pushes it open. And here there's a little note on his journal, and it says OP_cat functionality lets us verify Merkle inclusion proofs in Bitcoin script by concatenating and hashing data on the stack. And that's kind of really important. This effectively would allow, in every way that we would believe a true L2 should exist, if we have the ability for the OP concatenate functionality, we can essentially utilize Merkle inclusion proofs in the Bitcoin script and truly deliver a trustless, permissionless L2. And as he pushes this door open, young Ridgendale finds himself standing among the soaring shelves of the library of spells. Roots and branches intertwine to house a treasure trove of spellbooks that stretch towards the sky. There's an ephemeral pink luminescence emitted by magic tulips that line each row. Young Ridgendale says, what secrets this hidden library must hold? I feel the pull of arcane magic long forgotten. Young Ridgendale begins to stroll down the aisles. As he encompasses the library, the Quantum Cat floats behind young Ridgendale, emitting a soft glow. Young Ridgendale stops as one book's binding glints in the light. What is this book that seems to be calling to me? Cat and Schnorr Tricks, a spellbook by Archmage Polstra. I must uncover the mysteries of this spell. 2 hours later, young Ridgendale looks up from the spellbook, his eyes alight with the joy of new knowledge. He says, Quantum Cat, I've learned that with your power, this spell will let me create recursive covenants and simulate finite state machines. This is an incredible breakthrough that I can apply to bridge design. Young Ridgendale decides he must continue to search this library for more forgotten spells. So what you're getting introduced here is that this is actually a solution being introduced by another individual named Polstra. Polstra actually created this idea, but he didn't have a way to bridge it over, right? Because he needed to concatenate the ability to create recursive covenants in order for this structure to work. And this is what the Taproot wizards are now noting, is that you could actually use OP_cat to solve for this, and then you have a clear solution to create those recursive covenants and simulate finite state machines, which are effectively necessary to create a truly trustless and permissionless L2. And here in the Ridgendale's journal, we see the little bit more of the technical detail. OP_cat allows a mathematical trick with Schnorr signatures that lets us validate transaction components such as inputs and outputs. On its own, we can use this trick to require that transactions are sent to specific addresses, including the same addresses that funded the transaction. We can also require that some outputs are of a specific shape, e.g. that they contain specific data in an OP return. The same trick also allows us to validate the output values of previous transactions. When we combine output constraints with the ability to validate previous transaction outputs, we can build recursive covenants that drive transactions through a finite state machine. See the Perfect Vault for an example of this mechanism, where they show kind of a vault design. What you're effectively seeing here is that with this functionality and then utilizing Schnorr signatures as noted by Archmage Polstra, right, a real individual, his name's not Archmage, his last name is Polstra, right, you can actually be able to have some of the smart contract functionality, i.e. transactions are sent to specific addresses, right, including the same address that funded the transaction, right? You can see this would work really well for staking, right? You can see this, you could actually have a true L2 staking tool. And this could also then be extended to a lot of other things, right? For DeFi, yield, incentives, and advantages as well. And because of that, you could also create new outputs that are a specific shape, and these outputs could include ordinals, these outputs could include other specific data in this OP return as well. And this is kind of the amazing thing, is that we actually seem to have all the layers in front of us to be able to see a functional L2. But let's kind of continue here. Young Ridgendale continues his exploration of the library spells. He walks by one massive book that lays open on a table and dwarfs all the others in the library. This enormous tome is simply called Simplicity, yet it looks like a spell that will never be completed. I don't believe this is what I'm looking for. Young Ridgendale and the Quantum Cat continue searching and find a book slightly ajar from the rest. It has a red hue and the title reads Map, a spell by Salvatore. Young Ridgendale begins reading. Young Ridgendale says, this mage Salvatore must have been truly ingenious. His spell describes how to design a bridge that will stand the test of time. Salvatore has an interesting insight. The ability to verify a Merkleized program trace combined with a covenant powerful enough to simulate finite state machines will allow us to perform optimistic withdrawals based on arbitrary computation. Unfortunately, it appears to require sorcery inaccessible in this world called OP_check contract verify. Young Ridgendale paces the library with the Quantum Cat. His mind reels from the mystical knowledge he just acquired. So what you're seeing here is that you're also seeing that there are other ways to extend and truly get to this smart contract-like functionality, utilizing a covenant to simulate those finite state machines. And there's a lot of technical jargon here that we could dive deeper into a little bit later. I really want to just kind of cover the spectrum. But let's quickly just go to the Ridgendale's journal, and then I'll jump to some of the questions here at the moment right now that is going on. So, Matt, Merkleize all the things is what it stands for. It's an acronym, MATT, is a design for encumbering a UTXO with arbitrary off-chain computation. When someone wants to spend from the UTXO, they are forced through an optimistic withdrawal pass during a waiting period. A challenger can force an interactive protocol where successive Merkle commitments are open until a step in a trace of the computation is found to be in contention. This triggers an execution of the contentious step on chain, with the winner gaining access to the funds. A covenant proposal called OP_check contract verify provides the necessary expressiveness, that's going to be a very key word we'll talk about over the next few weeks, to implement both the optimistic withdrawal path and the challenger spawn state machine. It does so in a way that anyone with the data produce either withdrawal or challenge can participate. This is in contrast to pre-signed transaction construction where only a closed set of predefined participants can interact with the system. So what you're seeing here is that if we can find a way to use OP_CAT, it effectively becomes this bridge to a lot of other features and tools that would effectively give you a trustless, permissionless L2 that would be pretty much aligned with almost all major parties in this marketplace, right? And this is essentially the holy grail that Taproot Wizards is trying to present, right? And essentially, right, there's all this knowledge that you're seeing here, and we'll talk about this here as well. And this is going to be a little bit more of a technical thing, but let's kind of finish out the last few pages here. Young Ridgendale is rejuvenated by the new knowledge he has gained. He feels like he's teetering on the edge of a breakthrough. He says, wait a minute, Quantum Cat, your powers let us verify a Merkleized program trace. You showed me that when you led me on that path through the forest. And I learned from Archmage Polstra that we can simulate finite state machines with your powers too. This means I can cast Salvatore's spell and construct a permissionless bridge that relies on optimistic validation of arbitrary computation with just the OP_CAT functionality. I'll call this creation Cat VM, and this is them introducing Cat VM. Come on, Quantum Cat, we have to go to permissionless point and begin constructing on Cat VM immediately. Young Ridgendale rushes through the library of spells and back through Myrkletree Forest. The Quantum Cat floats behind quickly. However, as he reaches the edge of the forest, the Quantum Cat stops. Young Ridgendale pauses at the end of the forest and remembers that was banished here by the Great Spirit Satoshi. He decides to call upon Satoshi and ask for the Quantum Cat to be freed. He says, Great Spirit Satoshi, I've journeyed to the library spells in the Myrkletree Forest. There I conceived a new magic that will allow me to construct an ideal bridge off a permissionless point. Behold, I call it Cat VM. Satoshi responds, what is this? You have found a solution to the Isle of Chain's plight? Satoshi emerges in the clouds above. Young Ridgendale responds, yes, the bridge has all the characteristics any islander could want. Anyone will be able to cross back and forth, not just the most daring. The structure is sound and simple. The cost to create and utilize the bridge will be minimal and will lead directly to the riches of off-chain. Satoshi says, "This is truly incredible, young Rigidale. You must begin construction at once." And Rigidale says, "I have everything I need except one thing, the power of the quantum cat." Satoshi, "I once feared the quantum cat power was too great, but the Isle of Chain has grown since that age. I believe it is time. Quantum cat, I release you." Young Rigidale thanks Satoshi for seeing reason and sets out to construct Cat VM with the quantum cat off of permissionless point. And then you get these kind of beautiful little image here at the end. "I'm going straight to the market to trustlessly swap my coins." Jeez. Was that flash in the distance a plasma cache? I think I saw a snark. Grab your hunting gear and let's go. Look at the wonders off-chains holds. We did it. Meow. And this is kind of showing you that this Merkle Tree bridge that's enabled through the OP-Cat functionality would allow for essentially, whether it be zero knowledge rollups or optimistic rollups or all these elements to come from an L2 world. But the challenge effectively becomes, can we get this functionality of OP-Cat? So the Great Spirit Satoshi floats above with the Quantum Cat along with Young Rigidale. They reflect on the marvel they achieve with the Cat VM. Cat VM has safely linked the Isles of Chain and off-chain. Your work for the citizens of Chain is complete. I will now return you to your world, Young Rigidale, but take with you this token of our undying gratitude. As Young Rigidale begins to fade, a shining wand appears in Rigidale's hand, with a Quantum Cat intricately etched onto it. Satoshi says, "This wand is a covenant that will link you to the Isle of Chain forever. Whenever you wish to return to us, merely wave your wand and speak the words meow, meow, meow. Farewell for now, Young Rigidale. Perhaps one day we shall meet again." As Young Rigidale fades back into the dream, Satoshi and the Quantum Cat walk off into the sunset. Cat VM, there and back again. So, I appreciate you guys letting me walk you through this story here really quickly. But what you want to kind of understand, right, is that in this challenge, and in this market, almost all L2s are not real L2s at the moment, right? Everyone that is talking about they're an L2 on a Bitcoin is effectively giving you their best workaround bet on being essentially a quasi L2, or what you might hear is a hybrid L2. These are going to be, what that means is we're not a real L2, but we're something that's extending this ecosystem. And because of this becomes that large challenge. And even when we talk about this vision that Quantum Cats has and Taproot Wizards have, the challenge they have is that effectively they need a revival of an old functionality tool that Satoshi had in this OP_cat, which stands for the functionality of concatenate. And because of this, right, it led to this very large challenge, right? This very large challenge now of, can you get a fork and get enough parties to band together to believe that introducing OP-Cat will not be a negative, rather it will be a positive. But this is a real challenge because, again, this is kind of the same debate that you kind of have, like, if you're in America, we have this stupid debate of like what our forefathers said, right? Like we talk about this huge, like larger challenge, right? In being able to, like we talk about like the right to bear arms, right? Is like one of our amendments here in the US. So that's really allowed people to like rally and say we need our rights to guns no matter what, right? That's kind of the US's perspective, because they're using this covenant that this is what our forefathers want. We should listen to them, right? That's kind of this like defense they use. And that's what a lot of like massive, massive problems are running into when it comes to like Bitcoin. It's the same thing. Satoshi took this out. He took out the functionality of OP_cat. He had reasons for it at the time, but the question begs is, do those reasons still maintain today? Right? We're talking 15 years later, right? Are we actually going to stick with what the tech is today? Or, right, are we talking about that we need healthy updates that require soft fork to actually build this stuff out. And this becomes a much larger challenge here because that means that Taproot Wizards also doesn't have a clear line of sight on when this will be realized. So what is the larger takeaway from this, right? Is one, what you want to understand is we have no clear line of sight on when an L2, right, is going to have the technological capabilities to actually truly deliver a trustless, permissionless L2, as we've seen, right? Like, that's kind of an important thing to understand. We're all just biting, we're all like, to be very honest, we're all just being overly aggressive as a market because a lot of people are just trying to copy paste the Ethereum model. And that's not really going to work here to an extent. And that's also an important thing for you guys to take away in this conversation. You're going to see a lot of vaporware that will still make money. So those might still be worth farming. But the one thing that I think will be very clear is that if you're able to farm the projects that actually have the technology breakthrough, those are going to be your 10x, 100x crops. That's the actual play that is being introduced here at the moment right now. But it may take some time. So what it also means then when we're thinking about like our ways to get exposure, we're probably not wanting to only be betting solely on just L2 chains and what they're trying to push out. What we're really trying to bet on are two things, right? We're trying to bet on who is actually going to get like the right backing to be able to play this game long enough, right? And I think that's kind of an important thing here, right? To have 2+ years of lots of solid capital to take swings at building this in, right? And because of this, right, we're now running into this challenge of, does a Bitcoin L2 get realized in this year? That's kind of the biggest unknown. And because it's the biggest unknown, that means that we have to start looking at protocol plays just as much as we're looking at layer 2 plays as well. And this becomes the larger challenge here too. Let me just go through a few questions. David Code says, I made a website for chapter 12. Awesome. I'm jumping to your website here really quickly. Let me see if this shows up. Awesome. Yeah. Sorry, it's on the wrong page. Let me put it here. Cool. So David is showing me a link to something he had kind of shared earlier. Oh, why doesn't this? Okay, well, I can't see it myself on this, but it works on my other screen. But what you can see, right, is that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. And that's kind of the core part of this conversation to understand, is that you actually want to be incredibly solid on your technical side of the equation here, right? Because you should start asking your questions is this a real L2? And that's going to be one of the first guidebooks we're going to share with you guys later this week, is what's a real L2? And then more importantly, right, the question is going to beg is, who do we want to bet on and give them the time to receive that in the long run? And what is actually going to be amazing about this is that we could follow smart money. What are we going to do? We're going to follow smart money, which means and tier 1 VC. This is probably one of the smartest ways to be able to get it because we know the signals in this market. What do I mean by that, right? Well, first is, when we say follow smart money in tier 1 VCs, we want to make sure we understand which VCs are actually at the best, right? And what is those qualities, right? What is the value of a Pantera versus a Multicoin versus a Polychain, right? And making sure that we know how to follow those guys, and Binance Labs and OKX Ventures and Bybit Ventures, right? You want to understand these. This will be one of the areas here. But the other hack that we're going to have in our favor is really just understanding how to use Google News, right? Like being able to search which firms are getting funded as well in real time is one of the best ways for you to kind of start diversifying your risk. So for example, if we go run and just simply go Like I ran literally the search Bitcoin layer 2s are possible. Let me see if I can run this real quick again. One sec. Bitcoin layer 2s are possible, and I go to news. What I'm essentially doing is that I'm trying to see who's trying to push this vision of Bitcoin layer 2s. And then I'm trying to look at what is the technology and how are people kind of grouping their names and their terms. And this is a really great way to then find teams that have recently funded. So, for example, I'm looking at guys who've raised more than 5 million and have raised at least from one tier 1 VC. So, for example, we then have some of these challenges that are pretty interesting, right? So, we have Botanics Labs raises $8.5 million for building something that is compatible Ethereum layer. And this is where you're going to start seeing new terms like spider chains and stuff like that, which will be pretty interesting. But the other thing is we keep kind of going through, you could find a little bit more of like the understanding of what are tier 1 VCs that we like. Well, Multicoin Capital would be considered like a tier 2 by many people. We could go look at this. They actually usually don't do a lot of Bitcoin investments, but we see that they raised and led around the Bitcoin platform Arch, which is trying to create bridgeless trading directly. And these are kind of the ways that we want to like start small, following smart money. And here's the cool thing: we're gonna have all of this automated for you guys, so you could be able to start seeing this. But this is kind of the clearest bet. And here's the other thing you want to find is you also want to find the types of teams that are raising with something called token warrants. This is really important, right? You want to find venture teams that have raised capital and they have given token warrants to their VCs. Why is that? It means that they are economically incentivized to launch a token with all parties. It means that they are most likely going to utilize CBRC20, BRC20, one of these token based protocols, somewhat in the near future. And a lot of times they will actually note that you could usually find that language in this. And to be very honest, almost all of them are raising on token warrants. Yeah, here, for example, this round was structured as a simple agreement for future equity safe with token warrants, right? This would be a good team to follow along. It means they have some plans to potentially, right, actually layer a token out into this ecosystem for their Bitcoin native applications. And this is kind of how you quickly just start finding new players. And what you should be doing is you should be finding these guys now when their news comes out, mainly because this is where you could get early leads on what they're doing. And the truth is, a lot of these guys won't be real L2s, right? A lot of these will be fake L2s, as Prof J was just noting here at the moment right now, right? A lot of these ones that, Eric Wall trashed, right? Like, he knocked B2 network or B squared network. He knocked Merlin chain. Both of those guys have raised capital, right? Which is really interesting, right? And this also just shows you is that a lot of capital is being blindly allocated because they also believe it's just a race for time, right? It's just like it's a kind of a blue ocean race. It's like no one's claimed Bitcoin L2s. Let's be one of the first 25, right? Like, and that's kind of what it is. And in a lot of cases, Wild West crypto, it is people sending in money, right? Just like purely as a trust that they're gonna give it back to you in the form of tokens, right? But there's nothing trustless about the process. They could hold everything if they wanted. There's no smart contracting governing a full requirement, right? And this is kind of what you're going to see is that we're going to have to dive through a lot of fake pitches to find real stuff as well. And when I say fake, I don't want to say like it's fake where it's not going to be worth nothing. But what you're going to realize is that their ability as a layer 2 to have more ecosystem being built on it is going to be low. So you might want to plant a few crops of those projects that at least have good funding. But what you really want to bet on are the teams that are going to have massive amounts, are taking a massive swing in a technology breakthrough that will open up an ecosystem. Those guys will be worth 100x realistically, right? This is where, if you actually look at this market, if you have the capital, even though I cannot speak from a technological perspective on many things, I could say that if you believe that Taproot Wizards can get the pull, the awareness to bring OP Cat back, right, and get them some part of the market to accept that, Quantum Cats might be one of the smartest buys in this market, right? But you're playing a very weird game. A very weird game where you do not know when Catalyst will occur. Will Cat VM actually be realized? It is on testnet right now, which is interesting. So there are workarounds here, right? And there are ways that you can actually play through it. But there are still challenges on market acceptance, understanding, and deployment behind it. So this is where you want to start understanding where your portfolio, because I think both runes and ordinals will be quickly correlated to the right L2s and protocol plays here in the near future. And right now, a lot of this is unexciting. So it's actually a perfect time to be setting up wallets, to be farming, to be getting ready to an extent. But this is also why you want to start leveling up your farming to be able to be ready for any chain, right? The best alpha I can tell you is that if you're going down farming, you should be agnostic on chain and optimize for opportunity. What you should be going after, like one of the resources that we're going to be introducing you guys in the next few weeks, is that you'll get guides literally breaking down the largest opportunities of farming on any chain, right? At the moment right now, Blast is the better farm than anything else right? And that's kind of an important thing here. On Bitcoin, there are plays like I think Liquidium as a protocol is still very interesting to be farming, just because you will need a liquidity lend protocol no matter what as volume continues to soak up, right? But what you're really recognizing over huge conviction. This has actually been my challenge over the last week and a half. We started to do these technical diligence and audits, and I just started to realize very quickly, I'm like, oh my God, like, none of this shit's real. Like, I can't even with a straight face recommend a lot of these elements to you guys without knowing the real risks, right? And that's kind of the other important thing of why we want to create a tier system. And we're even kind of, we realize our tier system isn't even enough. Because what you really do want is that you want to start making bets on types of L2s and side chains, right? Like, you will want to understand the difference between like state channels, side chains, and like roll-ups, right? Will be a very important thing here. But the truth is that Bitcoin probably still has one of the largest potentials, but we're waiting for that the opening of the floodgate moment. And unfortunately, we're waiting where nothing is happening, right? Like it's like, I mean, I hate showing this to you guys, but it's just the reality, right? It's like, let's just go see where Bitcoin assets are right now. It's brutal. I mean, Bitcoin Puppet's now to 0.17. Node Monkey's still holding around 0.3-ish here, so 0.2888. You have Quantum Cats around 0.35. They're still kind of holding there. And I also remember, if I look at this, top 100, let's say, OMBs were kind of holding the same price. Yep, 0.36 as well. But everything else is getting wrecked, right? Realistically, Bitcoin Shrooms continues to fall well, although there's some good volume this past week. Most of the, you have Ink under 0.01. You have OCM Genesis now under 0.06 BTC. I mean, you're seeing some of these smaller new mints just hovering, right? Where Tornal is at 0.003. I think probably the best has been Based Angels holding 0.005. It's rough. This is pretty brutal stuff. And what's brutal is just seeing the overall volume just gone on this front. And then what's worse is that we rotated into another asset where, again, oops, sorry, not pre-runes. I want to go to runes, where it's pretty brutal here as well. I mean, Dog's about to go under sub 200 million here. Ugh. Arctic about to go under 136 million here. This is brutal stuff right now. I mean, don't get me wrong. These are still pretty healthy market caps for any new protocol coming live into the market, right? But, it's brutal. Really brutal across of it, right? It's just like, you're exactly right, Waldo's Crypto. It's down across all networks. I think Bitcoin just feels like a larger letdown because this should be the cycle that it's an outlier. But the truth is, the tech and honestly the product narrative isn't there. There isn't interesting new products. Like, I mean, the real question you want to ask is, okay, what new ordinal projects actually exist that do anything interesting on Bitcoin that can't be done on other chains? It becomes really difficult, right? So you're kind of at this point where, you know, I think for June through August, you're going to have a generally slow summer across it, right? And everything is going to hopefully find a much better win in kind of Q3 and Q4. So what you want to be thinking in your mind right now is, okay, what do I optimize this, like, mid Q2, this early summer here at the moment right now, right? And this is kind of the other thing here, right, is that you want to spend more time understanding the tech, but getting very close to some of these projects. I think you're going to see some resurgence, some ordinal, some rune play, some meta protocol play might figure it out, right? This is why I'm also staying close to CBRC20. I'm still figuring out, does BRC20 make a comeback here with all their upgrades, right? But in reality, you want to understand across the board, this market is struggling, right? And this market will continue to struggle because it lacks clarity on the Bitcoin side, right? And when it lacks clarity, this is where you want to now realize you have opportunity. Understand the tech, understand the knowledge, understand the VCs. If you get that understanding, that will help you across all these assets for farming, for runes, for ordinals, across the board. That is where the alpha came from the last era on ETH. It will absolutely be where the alpha will also participate in this next era of BTC. But the other real alpha is bet on builders. Bet on real technical builders, right? And I think this is going to be another important thing. Find teams that you have more technical competence in. I'm still at this point where, I'm bullish on Rune Coin and RSIC because of Rune Dev. I'm bullish on Quantum Cats because of the Taproot Wizards team, right? And that's kind of very similar. You want to start applying that to your other positions as well, but also your farming plays too. So on Thursday, we're going to walk you through like what's even worth farming and putting stuff on your radar and the next 10 projects that have been funded that you should be following. Not that they're ready for farming campaigns, but that rather you're understanding and following those projects here too. Because in the end, right, you're trying to be able to be ready when farming does come, right? So this is the assumption that we are still holding, but this is the mission that I do believe in. I believe that there will be layer 2 value on Bitcoin that will usher a renaissance era of financial and transaction and volume-based value that is going to create huge growth and ROI opportunities for those who are there early. I sincerely believe that. I know, in my conviction here, my personal conviction, I believe it will happen. But the other thing I want to be very clear with is that it's not a certainty that it happens in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, not even the next 12 months. So this is the game that you want to play. But the good thing is that even without a real L2, there's going to be plenty of farming opportunities. There'll be plenty of ordinal opportunities. There'll be plenty of token opportunities. And that's what you want to get ready for as well, because you're given a gift to an extent where all of this capital and all of this ecosystem is still being faded. That is a good scenario. as soon as everyone starts telling you you should all be on Bitcoin, you know it's too late. And that's kind of what happened with the last era with runes, right? With this last, like everyone and their mom, right? It just didn't work. We're at this era where when people are fading, you have the ability to build conviction, right? And find those areas you want to build conviction. And I hope many of you might see that in Bitcoin. I do not believe there's any other chain that has a meaningful, even 1/10 of the upside of Bitcoin's L2 future. But Bitcoin's L2 future is still very unknown. This is the risk trade-off you're trying to play in this kind of conviction window. And this is kind of where you have that opportunity too. But at the same time, what I'd recommend is that if abilities to qualify correct teams and correct farms, be ready to also run farms on the different channels. And that's what can actually be feeding you in the meantime, right? You could be playing farms on Blast, on potentially Base, on whatever new L2s may come out. Maybe Starknet has a future, maybe IMX gets a future. There's all these other plays that are still available. But I still think that Bitcoin will present you the best farming opportunities in the next 12 months. It just may take time for those bigger realizations to occur. But when they come, they should be very rich. They should be very deep and lucrative. And hopefully, if you've been running a multi-wallet way, you could be able to get to another level too. So with that, guys, that's kind of the goal here on this Tuesday, right? It's really recognizing that you want to truly make sure that you understand Bitcoin's limitations and opportunity at any given time, right? Our goal is not to give you blind understanding and blind conviction. It should be rational conviction with real logic and real understanding. But what you also want to take away from here is that you need to know the tech a little bit more, right? And here's the best way. Learn it through just go spend time on ChatGPT. We'll send you more lists. But the best part that we're also going to do is that we're going to help you guys with guides from a few partners that we're going to be bringing in that are professional farmers who are going to help you with this too. So a lot of cool stuff coming up to plate. Definitely stay in tune for the next few events, and we'll hopefully see you online here soon. With that, guys, we're going to let you go. Keep stacking sats and hopefully keep stacking that knowledge as well. We'll chat soon. Bye now.